Not this time. He tracked left with the torso twist, working the foot pedals for a tight turn. As lead element for a lance, simulated or not, he wasn't about to allow a clan scout mech to report back on their position. As his targeting reticule caught up with the dasher and burned a deep gold of hard lock, Fitzgerald triggered both of his Blackjack's extended range large lasers. From the ends of his mech's barrel-like arms, ruby lances of coherent light stabbed across the field and into the fleeing enemy mech. One lance of energy cored into the rear torso, carving away engine shielding. The second sliced through the armor and the endosteel skeleton beneath to amputate the right leg at the knee. Threads of Ambition, page 20, by Lauren L. Coleman. The piercing cold of the Plain of Swords was as much of a combatant as the Cretans, yet they were more used to it than those Combine invaders. Cadet Captain Michael Obodo pulled his jacket tighter after handing off the rangefinders to a scout, and he puffed a cloud of warm breath into the air before saying, "They're here. Get the word out and shake off the ice. I don't want any frozen actuators when it counts." "Affirmative, Captain," a radio officer said before going live on the combat comms. While word spread, Obodo marched to the foot of his Blackjack. It had been more than a century since the machine had seen better days, but today it would have to work at least one more time. Obodo originally felt cursed to end up on Zosa 7, with its biting cold and endless storms, but now, with the planet in the crosshairs of the Cretans, it seemed more like destiny. If they were going to take this planet from the militia, Obodo would make them pay a heavy price. By the time he was settled into the Blackjack's cockpit and powering up its systems, the Combine mechs could be heard in the distance. Through the blowing snow cutting across the deep blue icy plains, running light battle mechs burst forward out of the haze, some leaping on plumes of plasmic fire. Others were in an all-out sprint toward the meager militia forces. With just 2 companies of battle mechs, mostly Locusts and Blackjacks, the defenders were outnumbered by the incoming swarm. Obodo could see the mechs of his militia unit on the move, stepping forward and back in preparatory dance to keep their mechs from gathering ice on their joints. As he stepped his own Blackjack forward, he opened the comlink and spoke. "Just another fun day in the snow, ladies and gentlemen. If they want this ice cube, they're going to have to take it from us, and I sure don't feel like giving it up without a fight. What do you say?" A chorus of cheers and joyous hooting brought a smile to Obodo's face as he raised his mech's arms and took aim at the closest Combine battle mech. The 2 speedy forces crashed together in a chaotic mess. Obodo used his NAIS training to keep his calm and take steady shots where he could. Occasionally his lasers and autocannons hit true, and a Stinger or Wasp would tumble down into the ice and snow. Some regained their footing, and others remained still. Unwilling to give ground, Obodo called for his forces to consolidate and move forward rather than retreat under the furious assault. Eventually, with more and more of the Combine mechs falling to determined fire from the Blackjacks and surviving Locusts, the Cretan forces broke and fell into retreat. The Star League was a glorious time. Weapons manufacturers were all over the place. It was before the Succession Wars and before Ameris decided to take on the SLDF and start a war. It was when GM really met the worlds of the Inner Sphere. It was when a weapons manufacturer no more than 24 or 25 days old could walk through the door, and every government procurement officer and SLDF bureaucrat went wild. A mech manufacturer sales rep could give a doorman 100 C-bills just for opening at the door. He shoved hundreds in the pockets of the gals who ran the starports. The dropship crews got 100 just for keeping the ship struts clean. But those days are coming to a close, and that's the hardest part. Today, everything is different. There's no action. Sales reps have to wait around like everybody else. Can't even get decent food. Right after I got here, I ordered some spaghetti with marinara sauce, and I got egg noodles and ketchup. I'm an average nobody. I get to live the rest of my life like a schnook. Glory Days of Metal Men, page 10. Pete Slick Hill, General Motors Sales Rep, 2780. In among the stories of strife and heartbreak following the Ameris coup, it's difficult to muster up too much sympathy for the arms manufacturers. They had a good run, enjoying many decades of easily won contracts, and it seemed that, for a time, slapping an autocannon or a laser onto a vehicle and calling up the SLDF reps was the path to an easy fortune. It sure seemed to work for Quicksell. But as the Ameris Civil War dragged on past the decade mark, the entire system of logistics and easy contracts came to an end. With General Kerensky's SLDF stomping all over the planets of the Rimworld's Republic and Ameris' curiously oppressive brand of command economy, arms manufacturers, and more specifically battlemech manufacturers, had to adapt to the times. The days of fancy high-tech machines with price tags in the tens of millions of C-bills were definitely over. Now the best way to secure a contract was to create easily produced economy battlemech models that could function in a wide variety of environments and be available to as many customers as possible. Battlemechs like the Vulcan, Enforcer, Grasshopper, and even our friend the Blackjack had an opportunity to shine. General Motors benefited from a strong continuing relationship with the SLDF throughout the Civil War, and while times were tough, production continued. The original contract between the SLDF and General Motors for the Blackjack included the following design criteria. They wanted a medium battlemech with insurgency suppression and fire support capabilities. It's an interesting ask because those two roles don't naturally mix very well together, and could have easily resulted in a battlemech that does neither of them very well. Let's look into the Blackjack and see if it fits the bill. The earliest production models of the Blackjacks were speedier and carried 4 GM-produced flamers, but the BJ1 that would become the Succession War's norm was markedly different. Its chassis was wrapped around a GM 180 Fusion engine which could push the 45-ton mech to a top speed of just 64.8 km per hour. Much slower than its peers, the Blackjack would have trouble keeping up with the pace of battle, let alone chasing down lighter battlemechs. Thankfully, the mech's mobility was improved through the addition of Whitworth Jetlift jump jets, which allowed it to leap up to 120 meters. If the mech was going to be slow, at least it should be able to excel in less than flat and open environments. The Blackjack BJ1 was given 11 heatsinks and 8.5 tons of Starguard 2 standard plate armor, which was pretty good for a 45-ton battlemech. For comparison, the 50-ton Archer 9A also carried 8.5 tons, and the venerable Vindicator 1R that wouldn't come around until much later on the timeline carried 9 tons. Once the extra stuff like cockpit and gyro was added, that left 17 tons or roughly 38% of the mech's overall mass for weaponry. To fill the role of fire support, 2 Whirlwind AC-2 autocannons were installed, 1 into each arm. While their damage output was paltry, the range allowed the Blackjack to pester targets well beyond the return fire of most standard weapons at the time. Plus, it had to be noted that it hit medium range at 16 hexes, which gave the BJ1 an advantage over targets who would still be firing with their weapons at long-range bracketing. If it could keep a target from closing, that could be a possible path for victory. Should a target get close, and to fill the need to act in that insurgency suppression role, 4 Intech medium lasers were scattered across the mech's arms and side torsos. Good old medium lasers, can't not like that. The end result was a medium mech that really excelled against slow, lightly armed targets. The problem with that is that almost everything excels at taking out slow and lightly armed targets. Reception for the BJ1 was muted, leading toward poor, largely due to the autocannons being insufficient for providing fire support. However, when the mech was deployed in lances or even companies, the combined fire could quickly burn down even heavily armed targets. The Blackjacks were a different story. Those had carried a bad rep for as long as Mark could remember. He still heard the story about a brand new one going into an engagement against Taurian infantry and getting blasted apart because the armor had fallen off. Not to mention the narrow feet always looked one stiff breeze away from losing traction and sending the whole mech to the ground in a heap. Signing bonus, Shrapnel number 15, page 100, by Jamie Wagner. Additional bad press arrived from claims that the mech's design was inherently flawed due to the Blackjack's narrow stance and foot pads that could have trouble finding traction in less than ideal terrain and weather conditions. Some, likely competitors in the marketplace, claimed that the BJ1's armor plating was flawed and could slough off in general use before even encountering the enemy. These accusations were never backed up with evidence, but as we all know, often a baseless accusation is enough to harm someone or something's reputation. It's always easier to destroy a reputation than to build one. True in the 30th century and true in the 21st. Thankfully, GM was able to demonstrate through real-world data that the machine was capable and was able to hold up on the battlefields of the inner sphere and periphery. As logistics lines were strained and broken entirely, machines like the Blackjack could be easily repaired and kept in the fight. This would become key to the Blackjack's survival as the Star League collapsed and all heck breaks loose across the inner sphere. especially since the GM Blackjack production lines on Cathil were obliterated early on in the First Succession War. Patrick abruptly reversed his motion and fought to bring his crosshairs to cover the enemy. Heat choked him as he fired, but the Blackjack didn't fail him. The lasers thoroughly denuded the mech's chest of armor and drilled into the left flank. Gray-green coolant from a burst heatsink sprayed out of the wound, but the real damage was done in the Vindicator's heart. Heat spiked as lasers carved away physical shielding from the reactor core. Not the way the smart money bets. Kellhound's Ascendant, page 134, by Michael A. Stackpole. Most of the BJ-1s that survived the opening skirmishes of the First Succession War ended up in the hands of the Capellan Confederation and the Federated Sons. Its tarnished reputation ended up aiding the mech's survival, as it was often relegated to defensive units and militias, which tended to keep it out of the fray. However, as we saw with the defensive action on Zosa 7, the Blackjack could absolutely hold its own. When House Davian saw how well the Blackjack performed on Zosa, he insisted that the mech get some attention. In the process, the engineering team reaffirmed that the poor reputation of the mech was unearned, and it would actually be a good opportunity to upgrade the current Davian supply of Blackjacks with new weaponry. The BJ1DB was born as a result of this process. It pulled the autocannons, 2 medium lasers, and dropped a ton of armor to 7.5 in order to make room for 17 heatsinks and 2 large lasers split between the arms. While this did fix the damage output issue with the BJ1, it also largely eliminated the fire support role for the BattleMech. The twin large lasers could reach out to 15 hexes for their 8 damage apiece, but for the BJ1DB to shine, it would want to be in the short range, in that right moment when all 4 lasers could be brought onto a target. That would leave the mech at 7+ into the red on the heat gauge, but with that -1 movement penalty the next turn, it would very likely be worth it. Letting rip with the lasers and then jump jetting away could prevent suffering significant consequences. The other notable refit for the original BJ1 cropped up in 3024, and it represented a shift away from agility in favor of additional firepower. The BJ1DC was a refit that sacrificed the jump jets in favor of a 12th heatsink and 2 small lasers split between the left and right torsos. While this did modestly improve the Blackjack's ability to help infantry self-actualize as charcoal, some would argue that it's a heavy price to pay to leave the mech earthbound. It's definitely not my favorite. When the time was right for Helm Memory Core refits, various attempts were made to tweak the existing Blackjacks before a more extensive Davian redesign hit the scenes with the designation BJ2. Though before we get there, the confusingly named BJ3 demonstrated the benefits of double heatsinks all the way back in 3042. In order to take advantage of the 2 particle projection cannons split between the arms along with the traditional 4 medium lasers, 10 double heatsinks were installed into the mech. This allowed the BJ3 to fire both PPCs while on the run and only end up at 2+ heat into the red. A full alpha strike when the moment was right would leave the mech at 14+ heat into the red, which would be a little hairy but survivable in most circumstances. For a more substantial refit, superfans of the Blackjack, all dozen of them, would have to wait until 3052's BJ2. If you were looking forward to it, I'm afraid that you might be a little disappointed, as the BJ2 Blackjack is one of the unfortunate cases of what I'm now describing as ER large laser syndrome. The BJ2 retained the standard 180 fusion engine, 4 jump jets, and 8.5 tons of standard armor. The structural upgrade came from the shift to 11 double heatsinks. Naturally, the design team took this boost in heat dissipation and drop-kicked it into the caldera of an active volcano with the addition of 2 diverse optics Sunbeam ER large lasers split between the arms. The traditional medium laser medley was removed and replaced with 4 Hovertech Streak SRM-2 launchers split between the side torsos and fed by 2 tons of ammunition. At a glance, the BJ2 retained its original capabilities as a long-range fire support unit thanks to the ER large lasers, and technically it was still able to be a short-range threat with the quad pack of Streak SRM-2s. Though I'm not sure about how useful those SRMs would be in a policing action. My issue with the variant is the 24 heat generated by firing both ER large lasers. While not as egregious as some of the other Helm Memory Core designs, being pushed to 4+ heat while firing on the run can very quickly cause problems with consistently pumping that damage out. I may be alone in this, but I would prefer the Blackjack to be a little bit of a problem every single turn than a somewhat bigger problem every other turn, even if it meant committing the sin of pairing an ER large laser with a standard one. If I'm way off base and the BJ2 is incredible, please let me hear all about it in the comment section, where I will definitely read it. When he'd spied the Blackjack from the Dragon boat, Eris had worried that it might have been the Omnimech he'd encountered at the Jinjiang Bridge. That would have meant 50 tons of state-of-the-art battlemech, 26.5 tons of weapon pods, enough to gut his Wraith in a single, if lucky, volley. The battle computer allayed that fear, though. BJ1. It tagged the red triangle. Eris knew that meant 4 medium lasers and 2 of the smallest autocannon available. Not very fast, but jump capable. All considered, his Wraith held a decided edge. Binding Force, page 182, by Lauren L. Coleman. Following the clan invasion and the Battle of Luthien, the Draconis Combine invested considerable resources into backward engineering the clan's Omnimech technology. One of the resulting projects adopted a defunct Blackjack assembly line on Luthien. After extensive retooling, the BJ2O stomped into existence. Besides the overall look of the original Blackjack, the BJ2O was a completely new machine. It weighed in at 50 tons, took advantage of endo steel, a 200XL engine, and was protected by 9.5 tons of standard plate armor. The 464 movement profile was familiar along with the 10 double heatsinks, but from there on it was up to the Mechwarrior techs and availability of pod weaponry to kit out the rest of the 26.5 tons of battlemech. The primary weapons configuration for the BJ2O was a nod toward the original battlemech, but beefed up thanks to newer technology. The 2 Ultra AC-5 autocannons split between the arms could send an impressive amount of ordnance downfield, though they were limited to just 20 rounds of ammunition per autocannon. 4 standard medium lasers were also split evenly between the arms, and finally 4 machine guns were set into the side torsos that could clear out infantry or search for critical hits on already wounded targets. As could be expected, the other alt configurations fit various roles and niches depending upon the mission need and mechwarrior preference. There are enough of them that I think getting into them here would be detrimental to our goal of keeping videos concise, so we'll have to revisit the BJ2O in the future. For now, let's get back to the main event. Because Terry Carrington's Blackjack, after giving the fallen Jab a quick dose of laser fire as it struggled to rise, was ignoring the damaged smaller machine to concentrate its own battery on the jumping guillotine. Its 2 large lasers drew lines on the guillotine's body that glowed sullen red against the leaden sky, even as a hit from her PPC burned the armor plate and myomer pseudomusculature completely away from its right thigh, exposing the endosteel skeleton underneath. Black Dragon, page 288, by Victor Milan. Our next Blackjack variant entered the fray in 3067 during the FedCom Civil War. It reflected the forward march in technology, including some neat bells and whistles. The standard structure of the BJ4 Blackjack remained the same, but the installation of a light fusion engine bought mass, along with the installation of 8 tons of light ferrofibrous armor. The overall movement profile for the BJ4 didn't change, still 464, but additional mass could be dedicated to improved weaponry. 2 light AC-5 autocannons were set into the arms, offering 5 damage per shot out to a maximum of 15 hexes. For the uninitiated, the light AC-5 weighed in at just 5 tons in comparison to the original's 8, but sacrifices some range to make it happen. Joining the autocannons in the arms were 2 ER medium lasers. All 4 of the weapons were aided by the installation of a targeting computer in the left torso. The BJ4's 10 double heatsinks were more than capable of keeping the mech running cool, even in a leaping Alpha Strike scenario. Unless you're standing in a volcanic vent, this thing is not going to overheat. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of the light autocannons, but in this case they fit with the original theme of the Blackjack, and their 40 shots per gun aren't going to run out anytime soon. The drawback of ammunition explosion risk was partially mitigated by the addition of case to both side torsos. While it's not an ideal min-maxed machine, I like the BJ4 a lot more than the BJ2. Archer knew his heat would spike, but he swung his own ER large lasers online and fired their brilliant red beams into the legs of the salamander. Armor melted off, but the damage wasn't enough to stop the mech. Fisk was about to turn and run when an awesome barrage of weapons fire from all around Archer hit his mech. Missiles, emerald and scarlet lasers, autocannon rounds, and the bright blue-white light of PPC rounds devoured Fisk's salamander and the surrounding area. The pavement erupted into a crater as flames, explosions, and smoke swept over the mech. It seemed to melt like a candle in time-lapsed motion, disappearing and dying into the explosions. Measure of a Hero, Page 200 by Blaine Lee Pardoe. If you are a fan of the Blackjack in the latter half of the 31st century, I hope you were happy with what you had, because it would be 40 years before the Mech saw another official variant. The BJ5 Blackjack debuted in 3107, and its designers at GM went all in with structural upgrades to improve the BJ4's ability to act as a long-range harasser. The shift to endosteel bought additional mass, but between that, the light fusion engine, and its 8 tons of light ferrofibrous armor, that left precious few critical locations for equipment and weaponry. The Blackjack that walked off the production line on Talcott carried 4 light particle projection cannons scattered 1 to each arm and side torso. These smaller versions of the tried and true PPC could hit for 5 damage out to 18 hexes. The only drawback was a 3 hex minimum range, which is a bit of a problem for a mech that was originally designed to be a capable policing unit. Thankfully, it wasn't completely defenseless at short range thanks to the addition of 2 light AC2s into the arms, which had no minimum range. Each was fed with a single ton of Case 2 protected ammunition in the left torso. While the damage output for the BJ5 is modest, it could keep it up for a very long time. Heat generation was a small issue if the mech was running and gunning, but the 10 double heatsinks were quite adequate. While not a machine that would win any awards for creativity or take home an MVP trophy from the post-battle kegger, the BJ5 is entirely okay. I think we might have sorted out what the theme is here. Is the Blackjack the most okay mech out there? If you're not a fan of the BJ5, perhaps the BJ2R, introduced in 3131, could tickle your fancy. It represented a return to classical form with standard structure, engine, and 8.5 tons of standard armor. The only modern structural shift was the use of 11 double heatsinks. The only cutting-edge item to be found was in the mech's arms, where 2 large re-engineered lasers offered 9 damage out to 15 hexes. If you recall from the last video or are fans of re-engineered lasers, they do their full damage to alt armor types that might normally have reduced incoming damage. Finally, a standard medium laser was added to the left torso, which is the closest thing we've come so far to an emotional support laser. Good on you, little buddy. That's it. That's the Blackjack BJ2R, a Spartan design harkening back to a simpler time. Is this our last official Blackjack variant? Oh, is there? Oh dear lord. Not wanting to be left out of the fun, there was a ClanTech refit designated the Blackjack C, first spotted in 3150. Apparently, it was among Wolf's Dragoon's forces, and it's definitely capable of leaving an impression. The main structure is that of a BJ2, but with all clan tech. This included a standard clan fusion engine, 11 double heatsinks, and 8 tons of clan ferrofibrous armor. That's all well and good, but the most horrifying addition to this mech had to be the 2 clan tech large pulse lasers put between the arms. Powerful and accurate out to 20 hexes, there are few weapon systems more perfectly tailored to the original Blackjack's mission statement. Should a target close in for some inexplicable reason, the Blackjack C could rely upon 2 streak SRM4s set into the left and right torsos to quickly end any interpersonal conflict. They each fed from a single ton of ammunition, though with streaks you're probably not going to run through those 25 shots in a single engagement. Heat for the Blackjack C is not an issue while running and gunning unless bringing the streaks into play. Even then, a full alpha strike will only run you 6+ into the red. Not the end of the world. Overall, the Blackjack C is a monster, and for only 1600 battle value, a solid pick if you're running a Wolf's Dragoon unit. That brings us up to date on the Blackjack variants, and all that's left is to feed my insatiable desire for relevance and attention through yet another totally non-canon and unofficial Mechfrog variant. For the Blackjack MF, I envisioned a machine that could lean in a direction that the other variants had not yet gone. The BJMF has standard structure, a 180 light fusion engine, and is protected by 8 tons of ferrofibrous armor. The bit that makes our Blackjack a gem was the addition of 6 improved jump jets, which pushed the mech's movement profile to 466. It eats up a lot of critical locations, but this Blackjack wants to fly. The mech's 12 double heatsinks would be needed, as its 2 primary weapons were a pair of snub-nosed PPCs split between the arms. With their advantageous range profile and no minimum range, the BJMF could keep out of short range of opponents' weapons while still dealing good amounts of damage in return. Backing them up, starting at 12 hexes, were a couple of ER medium lasers snuggled in next to the PPCs. With all of the internal spots of the mechs filled and both side torsos packed with improved jump jets and heat sinks, the BJMF is about as good as can be done with this loadout, short of messing with engine sizes. The MF will run warm if you include the ER medium lasers in the mix, but better to have them when the moment is right and need them than not have them at all. If you want to give this little guy a try on the tabletop, I've included a link to the free PDF of the record sheet in the video notes below. The range was only 150 meters. Siri brought her targeting reticule onto the dervish's rear torso and pulled the firing trigger. The Wolverine's autocannon vaporized armor and punched through the dervish's poorly armored left torso. Her medium laser didn't fire. Damn it, she spat while quickly assigning the medium laser to the same trigger as the autocannon. Tomas's Blackjack took advantage of the damage. Both of his autocannons and all 4 medium lasers punched through the dervish's rear left torso, leaving a smoking ruin. In an instant, the mech's firepower was cut in half. Playing with Giants, Shrapnel number 19, page 67 by Kingsley Montgomery. So why do we love the Blackjack? This is a tricky one because the explanation isn't as easy as just saying it's a good mech. Because arguably the Blackjack struggles to hang on to that bar. Much like adolescent mech frog in middle school gym class, I had my moments to shine, but pull-up day wasn't one of them. 40 and 45-ton battle mechs can have a really hard time justifying their existence because they're not fast enough to keep up with the lights who can often hit just as hard, and they can't hit as hard as the heavier medium mechs, which are the workhorses of mech battalions. The Blackjack is functional, has enough decent variants, and is inexpensive enough to take in units that have room for it. Sounds kind of bleak, so let me try again. While not typically the MVP, the Blackjack can take a beating and stick around long enough to make its presence known. Is that any better? I don't know. Perhaps it's best summed up by the legendary Dave Foley. Easy to punch, hard to kill. I like the Blackjack. It's definitely more fun than some of the other 40 to 45-ton options out there, but I'm interested in knowing what you think. Is there a variant of the Blackjack that is its ideal form? Are you now or have you ever been a card-carrying member of Team Blackjack? Let me know what you think in the comments below and we'll keep this discussion going. If you felt the video was worthy, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. I know I say it every time here, and yet there are still a few stragglers out there who have not yet crossed that Rubicon. If you do hit all the buttons, you're much more likely to see my nonsense in the future. The more people who tune in, the longer I can keep making silly BattleTech videos. If you want to help more directly, you can even join and become a channel member, which will toss a few bucks my way each month and helps pay the power bill. Thank you so much for giving this a go and sticking around this long. I really appreciate it. Now go out there and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.